Welcome everyone to today's book launch event for Chasing the Ghost, brought to you by World Scientific. A few housekeeping notes before we start. Please have your camera off and the mics muted. There will be Q&A session after the talk. Feel free to post questions in the chat box. Also, this webinar will be recorded and posted online. Good morning. Today, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Leonard Cole, who is an adjunct professor at the Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School and the Rutgers University Department of Political Science in Newark, New Jersey. He is the author of Chasing the Ghost, a book on the thrill of discovery and the individual who discovered the neutrino, a remarkable subatomic particle. And now I would like to hand it over to Dr. Cole.
Thank you, Yubing. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this book launch, which I trust you will find interesting and informative. I'm aware that the participants here include experts in particle physics, as well as non-scientists who know little or nothing about the neutrino. Among the present people here are scientists I met at Fermilab, the Los Alamos National Lab, the Brookhaven National Laboratory, and faculty members and long-term presenters at UC Irvine, University of California at Irvine, and several visitors I met at our trip to CERN, the Geneva-based European lab, and I traveled with them on a New York Times sponsored journey to that laboratory. Now, my book is largely a biography and also partially a memoir, and not about technical details of neutrino physics. Fred Reines thought it an absurdity that purportedly educated people be unaware of basic physical principles. He taught a popular course called Rainbows and Things for college non-science majors that avoided complex formulas and advanced mathematics. Consistent with that approach, the conversation here, as in my book, aims at comprehensibility to people of varied backgrounds. Before going further, let's have a look at a book trailer that was created 3.5 minutes that I think is a nice introduction to the overall subject.
I'm Leonard Cole, the author of Chasing the Ghost, Nobelist Fred Reines and the Neutrino. In 1995, Reines won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his 1956 discovery of this remarkable subatomic particle. Fred was my older cousin, and he was an exciting and charismatic figure. I always looked forward to being with him at family gatherings, and I have an especially fond memory of a time when he took me to the Museum of Science and Industry in New York City. Later on, Fred's essays and poetry, his singing and his stage performances, and of course his grand scientific accomplishments, prompted colleagues to describe him as larger than life. Chasing the Ghost is not only about Fred Reines, but the fascinating object of his research. Neutrinos rarely interact with any other particles as they travel ghost-like throughout the cosmos. The disappointment that Fred and his supporters felt during the years before he received the prize was charmingly depicted in a recent popular sitcom, The Big Bang Theory, by science prodigy Young Sheldon.
And this year's Nobel Prize in Physics is awarded to neutrinos for the discovery of quarks.
A primary feature of quarks is that they're always bonded together. But in that moment, I felt like a neutrino, destined to be alone forever.
Neutrinos have proved so abundant that trillions pass unnoticed through every person every second. More than a half century after detection, neutrinos continue to be called ghost particles. In 1965, Reines became Dean of Physical Sciences at the University of California at Irvine. In 1988, the university celebrated his 70th birthday. Among the tributes to Reines that day was a letter from President Ronald Reagan expressing appreciation for his towering scientific achievements.
If I were to be asked what, after 70 years of preparation, I look forward to, I would reply, to have a good idea, to live uncomfortably close to the level of frustration which follows an ever-increasing awareness of the vast and unreachable body of knowledge which surrounds us all. To learn a new thing. Thank you all very much.
Fred died in 1998, but the thrilling story of his persona and accomplishments is bound to captivate scientists and non-scientists alike.
Okay, I think I'm back again, and I can only say that some of you may have been a little frustrated, as I was, in seeing the difference between audio and visual. The words didn't seem to be coming out at the same time, but you got the gist. It was a cute and charming way of showing how this youngster, this young savant, young Sheldon, felt his disappointment, wasn't it? Bursting out crying when his favorite particle and the person who discovered that particle had not received the Nobel Prize, at least at that point. Well, before Fred and his colleague Clyde Cowan detected the neutrino in 1956, scientists commonly believed that the particle would forever be undetectable. That's because neutrinos almost never interact with other particles. They seemingly travel forever alone throughout the universe, as young Sheldon noted in the book trailer. Their existence was first theorized in 1930 as a means to explain an apparent imbalance in certain nuclear reactions. The law of conservation of energy, as physicist Ray Giordana has said, holds that what goes into a reaction must equal what comes out of it. Neutrinos were then hypothesized as particles to accord with that symmetry. But they so rarely interact with other particles, just one interaction out of trillions upon trillions of neutrinos, that they were considered undetectable. Unlike other particles, neutrinos can pass through the thickest solid material as if it didn't exist. Since Fred's discovery, the importance of neutrinos in the evolution of the universe has become increasingly appreciated. I see that Fawzia, a public relations person, just put something into the chat box, I believe, that as of today, literally today, or actually yesterday, Nature magazine, a premier science magazine, offered a review of the book. And in the review, which was largely nice, complimentary, the reviewer made the following statement, which is an affirmation of what we deal with in the book. And I'm quoting, "It has become clear that these elementary particles are key to understanding the physics of the universe." So they've taken on a central importance in so much of what we understand about cosmology today. Now, Fred's professional career began in 1944 as part of the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb during World War II. He remained at that Los Alamos laboratory until 1959, when he moved to Cleveland, 3 years after his and Cowan's co-discovery of neutrinos. And there he headed the physics department at Case Institute. While there, he initiated another foundational experiment in neutrino studies. His initial discovery was based on the detection of neutrinos produced by a nuclear reactor. Now he would seek to identify neutrinos produced by natural reactions in the Earth's atmosphere. To accomplish this, He needed to block confusing signals coming from other cosmic radiation. His team ultimately succeeded in 1965 after building a detector under harrowing circumstances 2 miles beneath the Earth's surface in a South African gold mine. That same year, he became the founding dean of physical sciences at the then new University of California at Irvine. Fred's love for science was paramount, but he was a charismatic and exciting figure, endowed with many talents. He wrote poetry and essays. He had a magnificent deep baritone voice, and his onstage performances included music ranging from Bach and Handel to Gilbert and Sullivan. He also played leading roles in local productions of Broadway hit shows, including Finian's Rainbow and Inherit the Wind. All this while teaching and doing physics, including the detection of the neutrino. I'm going to read a sample of his poetries to show the range of what he was able to offer and perform. And the first, I believe that they will be posted, the passages I'm going to read will be posted in the chat room so you can follow in that manner, as well as hear my voice reading the poetry. The first is a whimsical, short little ditty or poem that he titled Viva la Différence. And here it goes. Curves figure in sex in manner complex. The impulse, the action, the core of attraction is concavity meeting convex. So that's lighthearted and whimsical, but he also was a serious writer of serious issues. Of course, his experience at the Manhattan Project and thereafter, when he continued to work on developing atomic weapons and also defenses against atomic weapons, was a great concern about their potential destructive capabilities. And he titled the poem MAD, M-A-D, which stood for Mutual Assured Destruction, which was, in my opinion, an unfortunate political explanatory approach to what was happening during the years of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, each of whom had thousands, and to some extent have still several thousand, but had many, many more nuclear weapons in their arsenals. And here is an excerpt from the poem. What brought us to the brink, to the very edge of the abyss, to the place where the fires of hell are seen with threatening clarity? Can we, searching, find our way out of this damned maze toward an earth suffused with love to a brotherhood of man? Somehow divine a cosmic plan where individuals lend to one another a helping hand and collective idiocy is banned, where peace prevails and hell's fires no longer blind our eyes. Well, I think it's a pretty stirring, and the range of poetry and a lot of other pieces that he wrote in essay form are interesting and compelling. Now that we've heard a little of the poetry, I could let you know that he was a gifted whistler. A whistler? Well, here's a rendition that was picked up from a recording that was made in the 1960s. That was sweet. After Fred moved to Cleveland in 1959, he successfully auditioned to sing with the world-famous Cleveland Orchestra Chorus. It's composed of people who are professionals, but who are volunteers in a large chorus of more than 100 people. He rehearsed and performed with that chorus for the next 3 years, but then left because of increasing academic demands. The dynamic sound of the chorus is preserved in a 1965 recording soon after he left the chorus, actually, but the sound would be the same as what it would have been a year or two earlier when he was with the chorus. And I think you might enjoy hearing it. Another fascinating piece of who Fred was. One of the pleasures in writing my book, Chasing the Ghost, was to speak with dozens of scientists who worked with him and admired him greatly. I'm happy to ask one of them, Ken Ford, to share his impressions about him, but I want to say that Ken had been very much supportive and helpful throughout my writing of the book. And I'm just so happy that he's able to share a little of the time here with us. He, at one time, was chairman of the department, actually, the founding chair of the Department of Physics at the University of California at Irvine. And he was head of the search committee that ultimately got Fred to move out there to become the Dean of Physical Sciences. Well, Ken, are you there? And are you ready to perhaps share?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, I can hear you.
Heard. Okay. Yeah, I met Fred in 1950 at Los Alamos. I was a 24-year-old junior researcher. He was 32, still quite young. And we, for some reason, we hit it off and became friends. He was just an admirable guy, impossible not to like him. And we remained friends for all the rest of his life, which is almost 50 additional years. And as Leonard mentioned, I had a hand in bringing him to University of California, Irvine, where we not only were colleagues in the university and in the physics department, we were even next door neighbors.
Well, your admiration, I might say, is shared by so many of the people who knew him. Some worked with him closely, some not. A couple of others who are still at the University of California at Irvine began their careers actually as graduate students under Fred's leadership and tutelage at Case Western, which is now Case Western Reserve. It was Case Institute at the time. I can only tell you that you had been enormously helpful to me. And one of the pleasures I've had, and I don't see whether he is actually here or not, was to introduce me just last year to Douglas Hofstadter, who wrote a marvelous foreword to the book. And he also allowed me to publish for the first time the notes that he took after he met Fred a second time in his life in 1995 at the Nobel Prize ceremony when Fred received that Nobel Prize. And I might say that you, Ken, expressed a great deal of admiration for Douglas. In fact, he is a well-known international science writer. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his science classic called Gödel, Escher, Bach some years ago. And he actually, it seemed, fell in love with Fred's work. And I owe that to you, Ken. And I might say that you may recall that as you and I had gone through the book and you helped me with getting some science messages clearly in there accurately, You said, this is a good book, really a good book. Then after the foreword was added and that reminiscence, you said, this is a great book. So I'll thank you and Doug for elevating your admiration. And I would just say now that we can turn, unless you wanted to add something at this point, we can turn to another.
If Doug Hofstadter is here, it'd be wonderful to hear him speak briefly on his interactions with Fred in Stockholm in 1995.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, great. Yeah, I hear it.
I'm not on video, I guess. That doesn't matter to me. But yeah, I was told that Fred was too ill to come. And so when I was a visitor at the Nobel ceremonies. I was what they called an international visitor. I was supposed to make lively conversation with all sorts of people. And one day there was a reception in a big building in Stockholm. And I recognized Fred Reines because I'd met him once before and I'd seen photographs of him. And he was standing all alone, and I was completely surprised to see one of the Nobel laureates just being left alone. So I walked over quickly and said hello and introduced myself as the son of Robert Hofstadter, who was a colleague, not in the same university, but they were both in, particle physics, and they knew each other. They had known each other for a very long time, and Fred was extraordinarily warm. And he said, "Oh, very nice to see you. Tell me can you tell me some things about why your dad went to Stanford from Princeton in 1950?" And I told him the story about that. And then he said, "Tell me some things about Bob Herman," because he knew that my dad was a good friend of Bob Herman, one of the important figures in the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation. And in fact, one of the two real discovery isn't quite the right word. It's more theorizing, inventing the idea in the late 40s with Ralph Alpher. And so I told him some things about Bob, who I knew extremely well because he was a close friend. And we kept on chit-chatting, and I felt a little embarrassed that I was taking up so much of Fred's time. But he said, "Oh, no, I just want to keep on talking." So we talked for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I said, I just didn't know what to say. So at one point I said, "So here we've been, you've been in Stockholm now for a few days. What have you most enjoyed?" And he said, "Talking with you." And I thought, oh my God, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Here we are at the height of the intellectual world, and in a beautiful city, surrounded by royalty and other fantastic intellects, and we're having a little chit chat. And he says that's the thing he's most enjoyed. So I've never forgotten the warmth and the modesty that he had. He was just an incredibly warm, incredibly sweet, interested person. He wasn't at all somebody who showed off. He was interested in the lives of other people. He wanted to know about my dad, about Bob Herman, about me. It was so sweet. I just will never forget that.
Well, Doug, that's beautiful. And people can read what you just mentioned more closely and with a little more expansiveness in the reminiscence that is the appendix in the book. I hope you might be able to repeat what I think is a very, very cute story of your own experience when you were around 9 years old, when you organized a team of hide and seek.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know exactly how old I was. I think I was a little younger. My dad, being a particle physicist and nuclear physicist, told me all about the particles that constituted the essence of matter. And at that time, this was before the neutrino had been discovered experimentally in 1956, as you said. It was in the early 50s, around 52 or 53, when I was 7 or 8, maybe 9, but I think mostly when I was about 8 years old, that I was so obsessed with the neutrino, even though it hadn't yet been discovered, but it was believed to exist. And I wanted to be a neutrino. When I was a littler kid, 2 or 3, I wanted to be a raccoon. But when I grew older, I wanted to be a neutrino. And so I organized games at recess in 3rd grade where I would be a neutrino and my other friends would be photons, electrons, protons, positrons. I knew all these words. I didn't know anything about what these things were, but I adored thinking of myself as traveling at the speed of light, because at that time neutrinos were thought to be massless. So they always traveled at the speed of light, and having spin a half, I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded very exotic. And we ran around the playground pretending that we were particles.
That must have been the only time in all of world history that 7 or 8 year old or 9 year old got together and named themselves after nuclear particles or subatomic particles. It's a lovely story, and thank you so much for all you've done too to show interest in Fred and the book.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Right. Okay, and I think we can turn now to another scientist whom I spoke with and interviewed for the book, who knew Fred and worked with him and had some interesting experiences. I wish we had time for him to tell about all of his experiences, but at least one good one would be very, very welcome. And that would be Henry Gurr. Are you there?
Yes, let's see if you can hear me. Wave
Yes.
your hands, yes. And so delighted to be here with you all and be part of this excellent program so far. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, going ahead. I've been told that I have for my 3 stories, 90 seconds. So I'll start my timer. And because it is a short time, excuse me for talking fast. Anyway, there's 2 stories. One is about how to do research that Fred Reines told me pointedly during my graduate school years back in the 1960s at Case School of Technology, now Case Western Reserve University. And again and again, we had to keep in mind that Reines never did any research unless it had Nobel potential. So one story was like the following. He says, imagine you're a TV repairman at your workbench and you're working away on the TVs, and a guy comes in with his TV and says, gosh, you got to help me right away. My son has to have his TV, otherwise he'll fail his course. And so you push everything aside, and then another guy comes in and says, I'm going to lose my job if you don't fix my TV. So you push harder to fix his TV. Another TV may fall off the workbench and crash, but that's all right. You're working on the most important thing. Another story. You're at the beach and you want to pick up the most wonderful, beautiful shell you can to take home. Of course, the approach is you collect every seashell you see and you're carrying them with you, and they're grinding and crunching and you're dropping them. And another approach is you pick up the first seashell you see. It now is the most beautiful seashell you know of. You protect it, you clean it off, you show it to your friends. And then you go on down the beach, you find another seashell, you look at both of them and make a choice. You put one down and keep the other. Now you have the most beautiful seashell you know of, and you can now keep this up and go home with your most beautiful shell. That's an analogy for doing Nobel research. Another story, I'll make this quick. We at the Savannah River plant, and Henry Sobel, who was on this program, you see his picture there. He and I were at the reactor building in Savannah River plant, where we're doing ongoing neutrino research called the neutrino electron scattering experiment. And this would have been, I don't know, the 80s. And all the time we were at work in the reactor building, the DuPont company, which ran things in those days, was always very cooperative through arrangements to help us do whatever we wanted. Well, it came to pass that, it stopped. We couldn't get any help. And kind of inquiring around a little bit, we found out that this was the reactor area senior supervisor, a DuPont executive. And so we told Reines about this, and he came all the way from California, UCI at the time, to talk to the top management of DuPont up front in the main administration building all morning. Well, he came to the reactor building, and we went to one of the small meeting rooms in the reactor building and sat down there to wait for the arrival of the senior supervisor, who didn't show up for an hour. Very unusual for Reines not to get totally upset and fume. He sat there and whistled and sang and hummed and looked at his fingernails, tapped on the table, just waiting and waiting. We didn't even try to do other planning as he's normally tried to do to use up time. Finally, in comes Bob Ely, the lieutenant of the area senior supervisor, and the senior supervisor. And they came in and sat down. The senior supervisor was, oh my gosh, his face was red. He was sweating, whereas normally DuPont executives have their necktie and white shirt up just beautiful. His necktie was pulled way down. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the neck. He tried to smoke to calm down. His hand was shaking. And wow, and this never happened to me before. And well, Fred Reines starts conducting the meeting, and he's very generalistic and goes on and on and on with platitudes, how wonderful it was to have DuPont help us. They keep our experiment going and come and help us do this and do that. It was just wonderful cooperation for DuPont, on and on and on. And Bob Ely, whose chair was leaning back, suddenly dropped forward and put his hands down on the table between us and thump. Doc, that's enough. Tell us what the problem is. Reines leaned forward towards him, taking up the same postural attitude, hands on the table, looked right straight at him and said, "Nothing, I presume. Nothing, I presume." What a story. And end of meeting. That's how Reines handled people. He said to us, and Dr. Sobel can confirm this, again and again when we were trying to negotiate with other individuals and trying to get them to do something and resolve problems, we'd come out of that meeting or out of that discussion, and Reines would say, yeah, I know we didn't discuss many of the details and tell them what we really wanted. He says, but they'll figure it out anyway.
Okay. Henry, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
It went a little longer than 90 seconds, but I think it was worthwhile to hear it, and lovely the way you talked about it. Before we go to questions, before we go to additional questions and answers from the group out there, I wanted to get what I feel is an important reflection about Fred and his values and his great concern that the world behave better to itself, and thinking that science may be a crucial answer to some of the horrible military, political, economic, and health situations that we have. The cover of the book, you may notice, and for those not familiar with neutrinos, you may not recognize immediately what that image is, but it's one of a huge several neutrino detectors. This one is called Super K, and it's under a Japanese mountain. Way down. It's more than the size of a 15-story building, but hollowed out to have detection fluid in there. And such detectors and their associated experiments can cost billions of dollars. And some have been led to question their practical use. And I heard a wonderful answer to that from a senior scientist at Brookhaven National Laboratory, Milind Dewan, who said that he felt that affirming the importance of cultural values is no less a fine judgment than looking for practical uses. And then I would say, as Fred would have said, for example, isn't human society just enriched by the understanding, the scientific understanding, that the Earth is not the center of the universe as was once believed, or that the sun does not actually move across the sky from east to west every day? And I think the questions are adequate to put down on paper and understanding the importance that Fred, and I assume and presume that most, if not every one of the people participating in the call today would appreciate the importance of science in coming to rational understandings, conclusions, and a better world by making it a cultural value of understanding as well as a practical use effort. So you want to go through questions and answers. I would ask you, Bing, if you would like to go to that now, let me know.
Yes, so now we start the Q&A session. So everyone, please feel free to post your question in the chat box. Leonard, let me start with some questions that attendees submit ahead of the time. First is, was there any surprise during your research and the writing of the book?
I have to say that since you're asking it now, and not just because he happens to be a participant, the surprise was hearing from Ken Ford, who made the introduction, that Douglas Hofstadter, whose book I was familiar with, but I had no knowledge really about Doug himself, who I know has a PhD in physics and is therefore beyond my understanding of the complexities of some of the neutrino studies, that he had this unpublished series of notes that he had taken just a couple of weeks after meeting Fred and seeing him at the 1995 ceremony. And it was a charming piece. So as I said before, some of us, Ken Ford and I, think that his wonderful stories and his experience and his kind words, both in the forward and in reminiscence, was a big surprise and a very, very happy one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we just got another question, actually is for Ken. We'd love to hear you describe some of your impression of Fred Reines. Ken?
Yeah, well, my initial impression was that he was a very large person, large in stature, large in influence, just a big guy, and a very extremely likable one. I mentioned that I met him when we were both young researchers at Los Alamos, and even though we were in different divisions of the lab, we struck up a friendship, and I describe it as just impossible not to like.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to steal a little bit of what you could have told as well. It's a lovely little story. It's in the book, but I'm going to mention it again. When I visited you at your home, and Joanna was there, your wife, she told of a little story that I thought was quite cute and quite typical of Fred's kind of behavior, sometimes seen as unusual or odd, but pleasant. And out of nowhere, when you were at this little social gathering party, your wife was sitting there, and he got down on one knee and he started singing an opera, an aria of some sort. And she said, I had no idea what the language was or what the meaning was or from what opera. And he just sang beautifully. And I sat there, and Ken, you were bemused, as were others at the party, as Fred continued his aria till it was finished. And then I suggested, on one knee sitting before her, well, it could have meant it was a proposal for marriage, or maybe he was apologizing for something he had done. But that lent a little levity to what must have been a very, I think, engaging performance that he was so typical of doing. What is remarkable to me about him, even though I'm a younger cousin and therefore there's a family relationship, and through most of my life, there was always the lore of his discovery, and maybe one day he might get the Nobel Prize. But I found him even when I was a youngster. I mean, I knew him from the time I was sentient, or 2 or 3 years old, 4 years old, in family gatherings. And it wasn't until 1944 that he moved out west to Los Alamos, then a secret town. And I kept in touch. Less frequently did I interact with him after my childhood, but I always remember him as an engaging guy who loved to hear about creative people. And as he wrote in his own Nobel speech, or actually it was about the course that he wrote, he said that science, as wonderful as it is not the only discipline of great concern, and so one to be appreciated. poetry, philosophy, the arts. He loved creativity. And of course, he manifested that most in his scientific work. So, Yubing, back to you.
Okay, so you mentioned Fred's creativity. So in the chapter, Classroom Teacher, you describe in detail how Reines taught a popular course called Rainbows and Things, and how his manner of teaching was innovative and flexible. Do you see his teaching methods still important today with the availability of all kinds of technology to teachers?
It would have been very interesting to see how he would react to the subsequent technology following his death in 1998. By then, by the way, he had stopped teaching and being active in he was ill for some period before he actually passed away. So the way, and again, in the book, I include some transcriptions of what he said. Actually, some people had apparently recorded and placed some of his lectures into transcription. And it was very clear that he enjoyed engaging with students in ways that probably no or very few other professors would have done. For example, scientists or physicists especially will be familiar with the term beating, B-E-A-T-I-N-G, and that's for wave synchronization. So that if you can whistle at a certain tone and level, and it's a single tone that a person would hear, he would hear a flow of sound. If you could take a pretty much identical wave, whether it's a sound or light or other such thing, and just change have a discrepancy of just a slight bit between the two waves when they reach their peak or go down lower, then you hear a loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft sound. How would he demonstrate that? Well, a physics teacher in a classroom might play a recording or play an instrument. Fred managed to find somebody in the classroom who was capable of whistling, bring him down to the front of the class, and he would ask the student to just start whistling a single tone. And then he would break in with that same tone, but slightly out of the sync with the first, and therefore demonstrate the difference between between the sound of two wavelengths that are not quite in synchrony. So he performed in ways through much of his career. Another quick, lovely little story, and I shouldn't be doing all this, it should be questions and answers of others. But when there was a solar eclipse, sometime that would have been in the early 80s, I guess, in Southern California, and he was there. One of the students who was there at the time said they were in a large assembly room, and on the wall, someone had devised a way of watching the eclipse. You don't want to look at a solar eclipse or look at the sun with your bare eyes. So they could see the image on the wall. And it was not a total eclipse, so there was a slim area along the surface of light. And suddenly, as everybody is watching this eclipse take place, a silhouette of a rabbit appears. Somebody was doing something odd, and it was Fred Reines manipulating his fingers and his hands as if the rabbit was sitting on the edge of the sun, a giant rabbit, during the eclipse. And that was the kind of guy that he was, and he was beloved by students as well as many of his colleagues.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. His
Could I
students.
add one comment?
Go ahead.
One quick comment about Yubing's question. Fred's teaching style, I'd say, is inspirational, but not transferable. You couldn't have written a textbook or class notes outlining what to do. All you can do is take inspiration from it in your own approach to teaching.
right.
So yeah, it's very obvious that Fred's students were very fortunate to have him as their teachers. Fred is a very accomplished person. Here's another question is, during your research, did you discover why it took so long for the Nobel Committee to award the Nobel Prize to him?
I heard from so many individuals that they couldn't understand why he had not yet gotten that prize years earlier. Actually, it was close to 40 years after the discovery. But the prize ultimately went to him. By the way, it was at that time that he felt, oh, he was never going to get it. He was too old, it was too late. And lo and behold, the same year that he had a conversation with one of his graduate students that he'd never get the prize, that was the year that he actually got it, in 95. Why it took so long is speculative. First of all, the Nobel Committee had a habit of looking more, I guess, for a broader understanding than some felt was available for what Fred had offered. Another, excuse me, well, I better turn it back to you for a moment. I got this cough coming.
No problem. Just a reminder for everyone.
Good again. I'm good again. So the quick understanding. There was no clear understanding why. It could have been also that some people felt that anybody who had ever worked on a military project might not be as desirable a person. But anyhow, he got it, he deserved it, and it's lovely to be able to talk about it now.
Okay, great. Here's a question about neutrino. So an audience asks, is communication via neutrino, like sending a message encoded in a neutrino stream, a possibility, or are they also undetectable?
I don't have the depth of knowledge to understand whether and exactly how that would work for communications. I do know that Heinrich Paes, a neutrino scientist in Germany, has written a book about neutrinos. And he said that there are postulations that, for example, when submarines that are part of the military, certainly in the United States and a couple of other countries, when they're run by nuclear fuel and such, that they cannot communicate with other submarines or even unless they get up closer to the surface. Neutrinos are in the manner that they travel through space, and through solid objects, no matter what the thickness of the object. It was, he believes, definitely a possibility that would enhance communication when there are otherwise obstacles in the way of getting wavelengths recorded right through being blocked by certain objects. So the answer to that shorthand is it's not been demonstrated as feasible now or yet, but it may end up being one of the practical uses if you want to look for one from neutrinos.
Ken, do you want to add anything to that question?
Neutrinos as a means of communication is a very far out idea, to put it mildly. So I would say, don't hold your breath. I would never say it's impossible. I will never say it can't happen ever, but it's not something that is in the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Okay, here is our last question. How has the discovery of the neutrino added to the exploration of the universe through neutrino astronomy?
Well, I'll give my own answer to that. We understand that the sun issues neutrinos as well as forms of energy like light and heat. And we understand as well, we theorized at least and understand that the energy that's produced in the sun is done at the core, way, way, way down in the depth of beneath the surface of the sun. So it's done by the means of fusion of hydrogen atoms so that they then become helium. And in the course of their activity down there, before they rise to the surface from the core, there's a requirement that they pass through amazingly dense plasma. So when we see the sun now, before neutrinos anyway, we are able to see and feel the heat, the energy, the light that is coming to us from the surface of the sun. But it took as some speculate, thousands or maybe even a million years to come up from the core to get to that surface. Now, with the understanding that neutrinos pass through that plasma or any solid material as if it's not there, neutrinos that are produced in the core of the sun rise to the surface within seconds, 3 or 4 seconds, zip, they're right up there. So as we now can see the light, the heat that comes from the surface of the Earth and neutrinos passing, the actual creation and production time of the light and heat occurred at least thousands of years earlier. The production of neutrinos was a few seconds earlier. So it may be a lead, an opening into better understanding what's happening at that moment of observation, rather than what had transpired thousands of years earlier when you look at the sun.
Thank you. Ken, yes.
Just a little bit of historical perspective to augment Leonard's answer. If you think about how we know what the rest of the universe is like, you go back 2,000 years, the only messengers from outer space were light, ordinary light, which from the stars and from the sun. Over time, over the two millennia since then, gradually more and more methods of understanding the universe appeared. First of all, to spread the electromagnetic spectrum far away from light waves itself to gamma rays and ultraviolet and infrared and radio waves. And so neutrinos represent just one more step, you might say, on this whole long historical progression of more and more different ways of understanding and getting information about the rest of the universe.
Right.
Yeah, Leonard?
Well, as with so much in science, when you look at some programs and some experiments and say, well, there is no understanding of what this could eventually mean, we've been wrong so many times, wrong both in a hopeful way and maybe a disappointing way. But my favorite story about that was with the business of Einstein, when he predicted that, or understood, at least experimentally, he predicted something that could not, he said, ever actually be demonstrated, namely that you could take a tiny, tiny little bit of mass and convert that into energy of enormous, enormous depth and length and breadth, which is the story behind the creation of the atomic bomb. He said in 1934 that there was no practical way that he could ever see that could be useful for the conversion, being able to control the atom reactions or atomic reactions, nuclear reactions, that would actually create sources of energy. But just a few years later, actually in 1939 or 38, in a laboratory in Germany, there was that demonstration, which led to the great concern about whether Germany would pursue and then ultimately acquire an atomic bomb, and was a major reason for the initiation of that Manhattan Project by the United States. So there are surprises in all ways in science, some for good, not for good, but the truth of the matter ultimately seems to filter out after enough time and enough examination and reaction to what is today's current scientific belief.
Thank you. Great insight. Yes. I'm sorry.
Could I add just one quick comment? Information from outer space, and as it relates to Fred Reines. I remember so well when the neutrinos from a supernova in 1987 were detected on Earth. Fred was almost exalted, excited. It was a big moment for him, as if his whole life had been leading up to this moment when suddenly not only were neutrinos detected on Earth, but neutrinos from far away, many light years away, were also detected.
Right. And we're still waiting for more sites of evidence of neutrinos coming from supernova. They don't happen that frequently where we can't, and close enough to us to be able to pick them up in detectors. So we'll see.
Great, thank you. We have now come to the end of the webinar. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Leonard, Ken, Dr. Hofstadter, and Dr. Gurr. As the 2015 Nobel Laureate in Physics, Arthur McDonald puts it, Cole has provided a compelling personal and scientific account of a remarkable pioneer in neutrino physics. We encourage everyone to give this new book a read, and we're offering a 25% discount to today's attendees. It has been a delight to have all of you. Goodbye.